The satellite phone crackled at 4:47 a.m., pulling Dr. Marcus Whitley from shallow sleep. He fumbled in the darkness of his research cabin, knocking over a stack of field journals before finding the device wedged between cushions on the worn couch. Whitley. His voice was thick with interrupted dreams. "Marcus, it's Sarah. We have a situation." Dr. Sarah Chen's words came fast, clipped. "Logging crew found something 3 miles northeast of your position. Something alive. Something impossible." Marcus sat up fully now, switching on the lamp. Yellow light spilled across topographic maps, pinned to every wall of the 20 by 20 structure. The Olympic Peninsula spread out in contour lines and elevation markers, a maze of old growth and glacial valleys he'd studied for 11 years. How impossible. A pause. Then, bipedal, 8 feet tall, give or take, covered in reddish-brown hair, injured. The crew foreman called Fish and Wildlife, who called the university, who called me. "Marcus, they used a tranquilizer. The thing is sedated but stable. I need you up here. Now." His mouth went dry. In his career studying Northwest megafauna ecology, he'd catalogued black bear populations, tracked cougar migration patterns, and documented elk rutting behavior. He'd never, not once, given credence to the stories. The sightings reported by hikers who'd had too much whiskey. The blurry photographs that always turned out to be bears or hoaxes. "You're certain it's not Marcus?" Sarah's voice dropped to something between awe and fear. "I'm looking at it right now. It has hands. Actual hands with opposable thumbs. Facial features that are, Christ, they're almost human. The bone structure, the eyes. We need proper documentation before anyone else gets here. Before this becomes a circus." He was already pulling on thermal layers, his mind racing through protocols that didn't exist for this scenario. "Give me 40 minutes. And Sarah? Who else knows?" "The logging crew, 5 men. The university provost, who's on his way from Seattle. Fish and Wildlife sent 2 officers. That's it for now. But Marcus, the clock is ticking. Sunrise is in 2 hours. Once word spreads, I understand. Keep everyone away from it until I arrive. Minimal contact. Document everything, photos, video, measurements if possible. I'm leaving now." He hung up and stood motionless for 3 seconds, letting the enormity settle. Then training took over. He grabbed his field kit, digital cameras, measuring tapes, specimen containers, medical supplies, recording equipment. His hands moved automatically, packing gear he'd used 1,000 times for subjects that made sense. That fit into taxonomic boxes with Latin names and peer-reviewed descriptions. The Toyota's engine turned over reluctantly in the November cold. Marcus drove without headlights at first, letting his eyes adjust to pre-dawn darkness, navigating by memory through the network of logging roads that scarred the peninsula's western edge. Fog pressed close, reducing the world to 20 feet of gravel track, hemmed by Douglas fir trunks that rose like pillars into invisible canopy. His mind refused to stop working the problem. If this was real, and Sarah was too rigorous a scientist to call him for anything less, then every assumption about Pacific Northwest ecology was wrong. About primate evolution, about human uniqueness in this hemisphere, the questions piled up faster than answers. How had such a creature remained undetected? What was its population size, its range, its relationship to known hominids, and the injury? Why was it injured? What had gone wrong? Headlights appeared through the fog ahead, stationary. Marcus slowed, recognizing the green and white of a Fish and Wildlife truck parked sideways across the road. An officer stepped out, hand on his radio. "Dr. Whitley, Dr. Chen said you were coming. Follow me. It's another half-mile in." They drove in convoy, climbing a switchback that grew steeper with each turn. The road deteriorated to mud and exposed rock. Finally, the officers' brake lights flared. They'd reached a small clearing, probably a staging area for the logging operation. 3 vehicles were parked haphazardly. A crew truck, another Fish and Wildlife rig, and Sarah's Subaru. Marcus killed his engine and grabbed his equipment. The fog was thinner here at elevation, and the first grey suggestion of dawn bled through gaps in the canopy. He could see figures moving near a large canvas tarp strung between trees, a makeshift shelter. Sarah emerged from beneath it, her face drawn. She'd been in the field, he realized. She wore mud-stained cargo pants and a fleece with pine needles stuck to the sleeve. Her dark hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "You made good time." She glanced at the gear bags over his shoulder. "Good. We'll need all of that." "Show me." She led him under the tarp. The smell hit first. A complex musk, earthy and organic, like damp fur and crushed vegetation, but with an undertone he couldn't place. Animal, yes, but different. Richer, almost spiced. Then he saw it. The creature lay on its side atop several emergency blankets, chest rising and falling in deep, regular breaths. In the weak light of battery-powered lanterns, its features resolved into impossible clarity. It was massive. Even prone, Marcus could judge its height at 7.5 to 8 feet. The body was heavily muscled, covered in hair that ranged from deep auburn across the shoulders and back to lighter copper on the extremities. But the proportions were wrong for any bear he'd ever studied. The torso was too broad, the limbs too long and articulated. The head made his breath stop. The face was flat, not protruding like an ape's muzzle, but recessed beneath a prominent brow ridge. The nose was broad but human-like in structure. Lips, actual lips, were slightly parted, revealing large teeth that appeared omnivorous rather than specialized. The ears were small, tucked close to the skull. Marcus knelt slowly, setting down his equipment with deliberate care to avoid sudden noise. This close, he could see the creature's hands clearly. They rested near its face, long-fingered, with thick nails rather than claws, the palms showing wear patterns consistent with tool use. Calluses marked the inner joints. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Yeah." Sarah crouched beside him. "That was my first response, too. My second was realizing we're looking at something in the genus Homo, or damn close to it. Where's the injury?" She pointed to the creature's left thigh. A crude bandage, one of the logger's shirts Marcus guessed, was wrapped around the leg, already soaked through with dark blood. Caught on equipment. A cable snapped during tree felling. The crew said it was watching them from the tree line, which is strange behavior for any wildlife. When the cable whipped back, it didn't move fast enough. The foreman said it made sounds, vocalizations that were almost words. That's when they called for help instead of just leaving it. Marcus opened his medical kit. "We need to properly dress that wound, check for infection, start antibiotics if we can figure out dosing." He looked up at her. "Sarah, we're in completely uncharted territory here. I don't even know what anesthetic they used, how much, whether its metabolism can process standard medications." The Fish and Wildlife Officer dosed it based on estimated body weight, using protocols for large primates. So far, vitals have remained stable. Breathing is 18 per minute. Pulse is 52, both slower than human norms, but within a range that suggests tolerance. Marcus pulled on latex gloves. His hands trembled slightly. Not fear, but the adrenaline of discovery. He unwrapped the makeshift bandage carefully, exposing a deep laceration across the lateral thigh. The wound was clean-edged, the product of sharp metal rather than teeth or claws. Muscle tissue was visible, but no arterial damage. Lucky. He irrigated the wound with sterile saline, then applied antibiotic ointment and fresh gauze. The creature's skin was thick, almost leathery in texture, covered by a layer of fine hair. The underlying musculature was dense, far more developed than a human's. As he worked, he became aware of the others watching. 2 fish and wildlife officers, 3 loggers, all keeping a respectful distance but unable to look away. They were witnesses to something that would change everything. The knowledge settled over Marcus like a weight. "We need samples," he said quietly. "Hair, blood if possible, photographs from every angle, measurements, full documentation before it wakes up." "Already started." Sarah handed him a digital camera. I've got video running continuously. We need to be careful about chain of custody. Every piece of evidence needs to be unimpeachable. They worked in synchronized rhythm, years of fieldwork making them efficient partners. Marcus photographed the creature from dozens of angles, using a measuring tape to record limb lengths, body proportions, skull dimensions. Sarah collected hair samples, carefully labeling each vial with location and time. When Marcus drew blood from the femoral vein, the creature's breathing hitched but didn't wake. The sky was brightening now, fog beginning to burn off. Marcus could hear birds starting their morning calls, varied thrush, winter wren, the distant hammering of a pileated woodpecker. Normal sounds, the routine continuation of an ecosystem that had apparently been harboring the impossible all along. Look at this. Sarah was examining the creature's hands under magnification. These callus patterns, they're not random, see here? Consistent wear on the palmar surface of the thumb and first two fingers, and here along the hypothenar eminence. This individual uses its hands for precise manipulation. Tool use, almost certainly. Marcus leaned in. She was right. The wear patterns told a story of gripping, manipulating, constructing. He photographed the details, his mind already leaping ahead to what this meant. Tool use implied cognitive sophistication, cultural transmission of knowledge, social structure. We need to think about what happens when it wakes up, he said. We can't keep it sedated indefinitely. The ethical implications alone, I know. Sarah sat back on her heels. We're not equipped for this. We don't have a facility. We don't have protocols. We don't have legal framework. By every measure, we should be treating this as a medical emergency and evacuating to a hospital. But Marcus, if we do that, she didn't have to finish. If they took this creature into a public facility, the secret would explode within hours. News crews, government agencies, curiosity seekers, scientists from a dozen disciplines, all demanding access. The creature would become a specimen, a research subject, a curiosity. It would never have a moment of privacy or dignity again. And we can't just leave it here, Marcus added. It needs medical care, observation, and we need to understand what it is, where it came from, whether there are others. One of the Fish and Wildlife officers approached, a woman in her 40s with weathered features. Dr. Whitley, I'm Officer Brandt. I need to know your plan. We can't keep this area secured indefinitely. By noon, there'll be questions. By evening, there'll be more people up here than we can manage. Marcus stood, his knees aching from kneeling on cold ground. How long before it wakes? Hard to say. Based on the dosage and its metabolism so far, maybe 2 to 3 hours. Maybe less. 2 hours. Not enough time to answer even the most basic questions. Not enough time to formulate a plan that balanced the creature's welfare against the scientific imperative to study, to understand, to know. He looked at Sarah. We need to make a decision. Now. Do we? The creature's breathing changed. Marcus froze. The rhythm had shifted, becoming shallower, faster. He knelt again, watching carefully. The fingers of the right hand twitched. The eyelids fluttered. It's waking up, Sarah breathed, ahead of schedule. Everyone moved back instinctively, creating space. Marcus remained close, but not touching, his mind racing through scenarios. How would it react? With fear, aggression, confusion? Every wildlife protocol he knew said to give space, avoid direct eye contact, prepare for fight or flight response. But this wasn't a bear or a cougar. The face he was looking at was too intelligent, too aware, too human. The eyes opened. They were amber, true amber, like honey held to sunlight, with dark pupils that contracted immediately in response to the lantern light. The gaze was unfocused at first, then sharpening. The creature's head moved slightly, taking in its surroundings. The tarp overhead, the people standing in a semicircle, the medical equipment scattered nearby. Its breathing quickened further. Marcus could see the exact moment awareness flooded in, replacing sedated confusion with full consciousness. The amber eyes locked onto him and held. Marcus had spent his career observing animals in their most vulnerable moments, trapped, tranquilized, under study. He knew the look of an animal evaluating threat, calculating escape routes, preparing to defend itself. This was different. The intelligence behind those eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't an animal assessing a predator. This was a person waking up in a strange place, surrounded by unknown individuals, trying to understand what had happened. Slowly, carefully, Marcus raised both hands, palms forward. The universal gesture, "I mean no harm." The creature's gaze shifted to his hands. Its own right hand moved, lifting slightly from the ground. The movement was deliberate, controlled despite what must be residual sedation. It brought the hand to its chest, pressing it flat against the sternum. Then it gestured outward, away from its body, in a clear, sweeping motion. Marcus's heart hammered. "Did you see that? It's trying to communicate," Sarah whispered. "That was intentional, directed at you." The creature repeated the gesture, hand to chest, then away. Its eyes never left Marcus's face. "I think," Marcus swallowed hard, "I think it's asking about itself, or us, or what we want." He pointed to himself, then made the same gesture the creature had. Hand to chest, outward sweep. He added a headshake, "No." Then he pointed to the bandage on the creature's leg and mimed caretaking, gentle movements, soothing gestures. The creature watched every motion. Its breathing had slowed again, not to sedated depths, but to something measured, considering. After a long moment it touched its wounded leg carefully, winced, an entirely human expression of pain, and then looked back at Marcus. Its hand moved again. This time it pointed to itself, then made a complex gesture. Fingers splayed, brought together, moved in an arc. It repeated this 3 times, as if emphasizing importance. "It's trying to tell us something," Marcus said. "Something specific, but I don't understand the meaning." The creature's expression shifted, not anger, but something like frustration. It tried again, slower this time, breaking the gesture into components. Point to self, fingers spread wide, arc to the right. Then it pointed to the trees surrounding the clearing, made the gesture again, and finally pointed up the mountain, toward higher elevations. "Others," Sarah said suddenly. "It's telling us there are others, up in the high country." Marcus felt the world tilt. Not just one impossible creature, but a population, a community, a people. The creature's eyes brightened, recognition that the message had been understood. It nodded. A gesture so human it was jarring. Then it made a new motion, hand flat, palm down, moving in a horizontal line. It repeated this several times, adding urgency to the movement. "Stay low?" Marcus guessed. "Or hiding?" The creature nodded again, vigorously. Then it made a new gesture that sent ice through Marcus's veins. It pointed to the logger's truck, mimed the sound and motion of a chainsaw, and then brought both hands together sharply, a cutting motion. It pointed up the mountain again, to where it had indicated its people were, and repeated the cutting gesture. Then it pressed both palms flat against the ground and pushed down hard, as if trying to crush something beneath. The message was unmistakable. "Your machines are coming. They're destroying. They're crushing everything." Officer Brandt spoke up. "The logging expansion. Pacific Northwest Timber won the contract for sections 17 through 22. They're supposed to start full operations next month. That's 5,000 acres of old growth." Marcus looked at the creature, understanding flooding through him. "You were watching the logging crew because they're at the edge of your territory. You were trying to understand what was happening, and the cable, you were too close because you were trying to warn them, or stop them." The creature nodded once more, and in its amber eyes, Marcus saw something he would remember for the rest of his life. Not animal fear, but human desperation. The look of someone who had seen disaster approaching and knew they couldn't stop it alone. Sarah moved closer, keeping her movements slow. She made the same hands-up gesture Marcus had, then pointed to herself and Marcus. She made a walking motion with her fingers, then pointed up the mountain. Finally, she made a gesture for protection, arms crossed over her chest, then extended outward. The creature watched intently. Its breathing had changed again, becoming deeper, emotional. It looked between Sarah and Marcus, then at the others in the clearing, the loggers, the officers. Its hand rose once more, and this time it made a gesture that needed no translation. It pressed its palm flat against its wounded leg, then reached out toward Marcus. Palm up, open, offering, trust. Marcus reached out slowly and placed his hand in the creature's palm. The contact was warm, solid, real. The fingers that closed gently around his were thick with calluses and immensely strong, but the grip was careful, measured. The grip of someone who understood their own strength and chose restraint. "We'll help," Marcus said, knowing the words wouldn't be understood, but hoping the tone conveyed meaning. "I promise you, we'll try to help." The creature's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, Marcus saw exhaustion there. The sedative was still in its system, fighting against adrenaline and will. It released his hand and made one final gesture, a sweeping motion that encompassed the clearing, the equipment, the people. Then it touched its own chest and pointed up the mountain again before its arm fell back to the ground. "It wants us to come," Sarah said. "To see, to understand, or to witness," Marcus replied quietly. "Before it's too late." The sun broke over the eastern ridge, sending shafts of light through the fog. The creature closed its eyes again, surrendering to sedation's pull, but its breathing remained steady, alive, trusting them to make the next choice. Marcus stood, his hand still tingling from the contact, and looked at Sarah. "We can't tell anyone else, not yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with and how to protect them." "Agreed. But Marcus, we have maybe a week before the logging equipment moves into those sections. Maybe less. We need to document everything, establish communication, and figure out some way to stop the expansion. That's not just a scientific challenge. It's political, legal, financial." "I know." He turned to Officer Brandt. "Can you secure this area for 24 hours? No one else comes up. We'll move the creature to my research station. It's isolated, climate-controlled, and has medical supplies. We can monitor it there while we figure out next steps." Brandt hesitated. "I'm already stretching protocol by not reporting this up the chain. If my supervisor finds out, if word gets out now, this creature becomes a spectacle," Marcus interrupted. "You saw how it tried to communicate. That's not animal behavior, that's personhood. And persons have rights we haven't even begun to consider. 24 hours, that's all I'm asking. Let us establish whether we're dealing with an endangered species or something more." Brandt looked at the sleeping creature, then back at Marcus. Finally, she nodded. 24 hours. But after that, I have to file a report. There are procedures, oversight. I won't compromise that, not even for this." "Understood. Thank you." As the group began organizing transport, rigging a stretcher, preparing the vehicles, Marcus took one more look at the creature. In sleep, its features were peaceful, almost serene, but he couldn't forget the desperation in its eyes when it had tried to warn them. "Your machines are coming." The message echoed in his mind as they lifted the stretcher and carried the creature toward his truck. Sarah walked beside him, her face set in grim determination. "We're going to need more than good intentions," she said. "We need a plan, a strategy, and we need to figure out how to give voice to something the world doesn't even believe exists." "First," Marcus replied, "we learn to communicate, really communicate. If it can warn us, it can tell us what it needs, what its people need. Then we become advocates, or witnesses, or whatever we have to be." The truck bed was lined with blankets. They secured the stretcher carefully, making sure the creature wouldn't shift during transport. One of the loggers, a young man who hadn't spoken throughout the entire ordeal, approached Marcus as they finished. "I saw it watching us yesterday," he said quietly, "while we were setting up the felling zone. It was just standing there at the tree line, looking, and I thought it was trying to tell us something even then, to get our attention, but we just figured it was a bear and kept working. You couldn't have known, Marcus said. Maybe, but I know now. No, the logger glanced at the creature. Whatever you need, testimony about the sighting, supporting evidence, anything, you tell me. That thing, it's not just an animal. It's got eyes that see, that understand, and we're about to cut down its home. Marcus nodded, filing away the offer. They would need allies. Every voice would matter. As dawn spread across the Olympic Peninsula, Marcus drove back down the mountain with the impossible-made reel secured in his truck bed, Sarah following close behind, and the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like physical mass. He had 24 hours to establish communication, to understand the scope of the problem, to figure out how to stop machines and money and contracts from destroying something that had somehow survived unseen for generations. 24 hours to learn what the creature had tried so desperately to warn them about, and the terrible certainty growing in his gut that whatever warning they received, they were already hearing it too late. The creature woke again at 11 a.m., this time in the controlled environment of Marcus's research cabin. He'd converted the main room into a makeshift recovery ward, sleeping pad on the floor, medical monitors hooked up via jury-rigged adapters, temperature steady at 68 degrees. Sarah sat in one corner, laptop open, transcribing field notes. Marcus had positioned himself across the room, visible but not looming. The amber eyes opened and immediately tracked to him. The creature's head lifted slowly, taking in the new surroundings. Marcus could see it cataloging details. The maps on the walls, the equipment stacked on tables, the windows showing forest beyond. Recognition crossed its features: indoors, shelter, safety, followed by wariness. Marcus raised his hands again in greeting, then pointed to himself. "Marcus," he said clearly. He pointed again. "Marcus." The creature watched his mouth as he spoke. Its own lips moved slightly, as if testing the shape of the sound. Then it placed one massive hand on its own chest and made a sound, a deep, resonant vocalization that had structure, intent. It repeated the sound 3 times. "Ree, ree," Marcus echoed, probably mangling the pronunciation. "Is that your name?" The creature, Rehia, nodded. It pointed at Marcus, attempted his name. Marcus. The effort was visible, the lips and tongue working to form sounds that its anatomy wasn't quite designed for. The result was close but blurred at the edges, consonants softened into approximations. Sarah stood up slowly. "It's trying to speak. The laryngeal structure must be different, probably higher in the throat, like Neanderthals are theorized to have had. Limited ability to form certain vowel sounds." Rahia turned its attention to her. She repeated Marcus's introduction. "Sarah." Then she added a gesture, touching her chest and making a small bow. "Saha," Rahia repeated, then made its own gesture. An open palm pressed briefly to the forehead, then extended outward. It looked between them expectantly. "I think that's a greeting," Marcus said. "Formal, respectful." He mimicked the gesture. "Nice to meet you." Rahia's mouth curved, not quite a smile but close, an expression of satisfaction. It shifted position, testing its injured leg. Marcus had redressed the wound earlier while the creature slept, using butterfly closures and a proper sterile dressing. The bleeding had stopped. "How's the pain?" Marcus gestured to the leg, mimed discomfort. Ruhia touched the bandage carefully, then made a gesture, hand flat, wobbling side to side. Moderate. Manageable. For the next hour, they established the basics. Yes and no were simple. A single nod versus a side-to-side headshake, gestures apparently universal enough to cross species. Numbers were harder. Rahia used finger counting, but in a base 8 system, using both hands to represent different magnitudes. Sarah worked out the mathematics on paper, while Marcus tried to establish vocabulary. Water, food, sleep, pain, help, danger. Each concept was refined through trial and error. Rahia proved to be a patient teacher, repeating gestures until Marcus and Sarah grasped the meaning. Some signs were intuitive, a drinking motion for water, hands pressed together beneath a tilted head for sleep. Others were more abstract. Danger was expressed by a sharp downward cutting motion combined with a specific facial expression, eyes widened, lips pulled back slightly. The whole body communicated. By noon, they had established perhaps 30 clear signs. It was pidgin at best, fragmented communication, but it was communication. "We need to try for more complex ideas," Sarah said. "We need to understand the population size, the range, the threats they're facing." Marcus agreed. He took a piece of paper and sketched a simple figure, humanoid, generic. He pointed to Rahia, then to the drawing. Rahia nodded. Marcus drew more figures around the first one. He pointed to Rahia again, then to the drawings, and made a questioning gesture. Rahia understood. It took the pencil, awkwardly, grip adapted for fingers thicker than human, and began to draw. The result was crude but clear. A circle of perhaps 40 figures. Some were smaller, suggesting children. Rahia drew lines between certain figures, creating what looked like family groupings. 40 individuals, Sarah breathed. That's a viable population. Small, but viable if there's no inbreeding depression. Rahia drew another symbol, a series of concentric circles with the figure group in the center. It pointed out the window toward the mountains and moved its finger in an arc. Our territory, our range. Then it did something that made Marcus's chest tighten. It drew the logging equipment, simplified but recognizable, sharp-edged rectangles with jagged teeth. It placed these symbols at the edge of the concentric circles and drew arrows moving inward, cutting through the outer rings toward the center where the people figures were clustered. "The logging expansion," Marcus said. "It's moving into their core territory." Rahia nodded emphatically. It drew more, trees falling, X marks over portions of the territory, the people figures scattered and moving away. Its hand moved rapidly now, the pencil leaving heavy graphite trails. When it finished, it looked at Marcus with an expression he could only read as anguish. Sarah photographed the drawing, then pulled up a digital map on her laptop. "Can you show us where?" "Specifically?" She zoomed in on the Olympic Peninsula, focusing on the high country northwest of their current position. Rahia leaned forward, studying the screen with obvious fascination. Maybe it had never seen a map before, or maybe the technology was novel, but quickly grasped the concept. It pointed to a valley system in the Valhalla Range, an area of extremely rugged terrain that saw almost no human traffic. Then it pointed to the adjacent sections marked in red on the map. Logging zones, 17 through 22. "That's less than 2 miles of separation," Sarah said. "Once they start operations, the noise alone will drive out game. The habitat fragmentation will make it impossible for your people to move freely." Rahia was nodding before she finished speaking. It made a new gesture, both hands together, then pulling apart slowly while making a pained expression. Separation, breaking apart. Marcus felt the weight of it. 40 individuals trying to survive in an ever-shrinking space, with bulldozers and chainsaws eating away the buffer zone between them and the human world they'd avoided for generations, maybe centuries. "We need to stop the logging," he said, "but we need justification, an environmental impact report that identifies critical habitat. Except we can't identify the species without exposing its existence." "Catch-22, Sarah muttered. "We need proof to stop the development, but proof means revealing them, which destroys any chance of privacy or protection." Rahia was watching them closely. It couldn't understand the words, but it read body language, tone. It knew they were troubled. It reached out and touched Marcus's hand. The same deliberate contact from earlier, offered reassurance. Then it stood up. The movement was sudden enough to make Sarah gasp. Rahia rose to its full height, towering in the small cabin. Standing, it had to duck slightly to avoid the ceiling. The size was intimidating, but Rahia immediately made a calming gesture. Hands down, patting the air. No threat. Stay calm. It walked to the window, a noticeable limp but mobile, and looked out at the forest. Then it turned back to Marcus and made a clear gesture. Follow me. It wants us to come with it, Marcus said. To see, to meet the others. Sarah stood up too. That's a 2-day hike into some of the roughest terrain on the peninsula. Marcus, it's injured. We're not equipped. Rahia made a new gesture, a fist, then opening the hand quickly. Soon. Urgent. It knows we don't have time, Marcus said. The logging starts in less than a week. If we're going to do anything, we need to understand the full scope. We need to see their home, their community. We need them to trust us enough to let us help. He looked at Rahia. We'll need 1 day to prepare, equipment, supplies. He held up one finger. 1 day, then we come with you. Rahia studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It returned to the sleeping pad and sat down carefully, favoring the injured leg. The message was clear. I'll wait, but not longer than necessary. Marcus spent the afternoon in frantic preparation. He called in favors, pulled equipment from storage, and drafted a cover story about a solo research trip into the high country. Sarah worked on analyzing the blood and hair samples they'd collected, running preliminary DNA sequencing that would take days to complete, but might offer crucial insights. Rahia watched everything with keen interest. When Marcus spread out topographic maps to plot their route, it moved closer and began indicating terrain features. A finger traced along ridgelines, pressed into valley bottoms, circled areas that seemed to have significance. Water sources, Marcus guessed, or dangerous areas, or places of importance to its people. Can you teach me more signs? Marcus asked. I need to be able to communicate when we meet the others. Rahia nodded and began a systematic tutorial. It started with relationship terms: parent, child, elder, family. The signs were complex, incorporating both hand shapes and body positioning. Elder was particularly elaborate. A hand moved upward from the chest to above the head, combined with a slight bow. Respect was embedded in the gesture itself. Then came emotional states: fear, joy, anger, grief. Rahia acted each one out with full-body commitment, its face shifting through expressions that were startlingly human. Joy was a raised hand, fingers spread, combined with a head tilt and what could only be called a smile. Grief was both hands covering the face, then slowly drawn down, the weight of sorrow made visible. They have emotional sophistication, Sarah observed, watching from her station at the laptop. Complex social bonds. This isn't just a tribe of reclusive apes. This is a culture. By evening, Marcus had learned perhaps 80 signs. Barely enough for basic communication, but a foundation. Rahia tested him repeatedly, combining signs into simple phrases. I help you, you help family. Together we protect. The pronoun was important. We, together. The concept of alliance. They ate dinner together. Marcus had prepared a vegetable stew with rice, uncertain what Rahia's diet consisted of. It turned out to be omnivorous, accepting the food with a gesture of gratitude, one hand to chest, then outward, the same motion from the morning. It used the spoon awkwardly but managed. Marcus noted the table manners, the way Rahia waited for them to start eating before beginning, the care taken not to spill, socialization, cultural norms. This was a person learning to navigate an unfamiliar setting with grace. After dinner, Rahia became animated. It pulled Marcus over to the map again and began drawing on a pad of paper. Not words. Its people apparently had no written language, or at least none Rahia could demonstrate, but pictographs. Stylized figures engaged in various activities: hunting, gathering, what looked like teaching or storytelling around a fire. One image showed figures with their hands on a fallen member of the group, heads bowed. Funerary practice. They bury their dead, Sarah said softly, or at least have death rituals. That's cultural universality, meaning-making around mortality. Rahia drew more, a cave entrance with symbols around it. It tapped this insistently, then made a new sign. Both hands spread wide, then brought together to form a peak. Sacred place. Important. Is that where we're going? Marcus asked. The cave? Rahia nodded. It added more details to the drawing. Interior chambers, smaller figures, children in one section, larger figures in another. Then it drew what looked like carved lines on the cave walls. Art? History? Both? Marcus felt overwhelmed by the implications. We're not just documenting an unknown species. We're making first contact with a culture that's developed completely independently of human awareness. This is unprecedented in modern anthropology. And we have less than a week to figure out how to protect it, Sarah reminded him, before the bulldozers come. Bajir set down the pencil and made a gesture they'd learned earlier. Both hands pressed flat against the ground, pushing down. Destruction. Crushing. But then it added something new. It raised one hand, fingers together pointing upward, and made a sweeping motion. When Marcus looked puzzled, it repeated the gesture more emphatically. Sarah's eyes widened. Humans. It's making a sign for humans. The sweeping motion, that's us, our spread, our impact. Bahir nodded vigorously. It combined the signs. Humans crush, destroy. Then it made a new sequence. The grief gesture, followed by the family sign, followed by the spreading fingers that indicated its people. Grief for family. Grief for people. They've watched us, Marcus said slowly. For how long? Decades. Longer. They've seen what we do. The clear-cutting, the development, the roads. They know what's coming because they've seen it happen elsewhere. Rahia reached out and took Marcus's hand again. Its grip was gentle but urgent. It pointed to Marcus, then to itself, then made the sign for together. Finally it made a new gesture, both hands raised, palms out, in a stopping motion. Then it pointed to the map, to the logging zones. The message couldn't be clearer. Together we stop this. Marcus squeezed the large hand in return. We'll try, I swear we'll try. But even as he made the promise, doubt gnawed at him. Pacific Northwest Timber had contracts, permits, political backing. The logging represented jobs, revenue, economic development. Who would listen to a plea to protect a species that wasn't supposed to exist, based on evidence that would sound like fairy tales? On behalf of a population that numbered only 40 individuals hidden in terrain so remote that modern surveying had missed them entirely, he needed leverage. Proof that didn't require exposing Rahia's people, or a strategy that turned their invisibility into an asset rather than a liability. Rukia seemed to sense his thoughts. It released his hand and drew one more image, a single figure, standing at the edge of a cliff, arms spread wide, facing away from an advancing threat. The figure was small. The threat, rendered as a mass of angular, mechanical shapes, was enormous. But the figure stood its ground. Marcus understood. It wasn't about size or strength. It was about witness, about standing in the path of destruction and saying no, even when the outcome seemed inevitable. Tomorrow night we rest, he said. Gather strength. Then the next morning you take us to your people. We document, we learn, we become witnesses to what exists, and then we figure out how to be more than that. How to be advocates, protectors, whatever we need to be. Rahia performed the greeting gesture again, palm to forehead, extended outward, but added something new. It placed its other hand on Marcus's shoulder. The weight was substantial, grounding. The gesture spoke of trust, of alliance formed, of a pact made. Sarah came over and offered her hand. Rahia took it carefully, repeating the shoulder touch. We're with you, she said. However this goes, we're with you. That night, as Rahia slept on the main room floor and Sarah dozed in the cabin's single bedroom, Marcus sat at his desk reviewing everything they'd documented. The photographs showed impossible anatomy, a creature that bridged the gap between human and something older, more robust. The DNA preliminary results suggested genus Homo, divergence from the human line perhaps 500,000 years ago. A sister species, a cousin lineage that had never developed agriculture or written language but had survived in the shadows, adapting, hiding, persisting. The pictographs Rehia had drawn showed cultural complexity, social structure, meaning-making, all the markers of a people, not simply a species. And in less than a week, bulldozers would begin carving into their last refuge. Marcus pulled up the contact information for the regional EPA office, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Sierra Club, every environmental advocacy group he could think of. He began drafting messages, careful, plausible messages that didn't mention the impossible but focused on ecological concerns, potential endangered species, unnamed, critical habitat assessments needed. It was a long shot, but it was something. Outside, an owl called. The forest sounds were peaceful, ordinary. Nothing in the night suggested that the world was balanced on the edge of revelation. That in a remote valley in the Olympic Mountains, 40 individuals waited, unaware that 2 humans and one of their own were preparing to either save them or bear witness to their ending. Marcus looked at Rehia sleeping peacefully, the large chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. In sleep, the face was calm, the massive frame relaxed. But Marcus couldn't forget the expression he'd seen earlier, the grief gesture combined with the sign for family, the knowledge of coming loss, the desperation of someone trying to protect what they loved against forces too large to fight alone. He turned back to his computer and kept writing. Every message, every contact, every possible avenue for delay, reconsideration, environmental review. Maybe one of them would work. Maybe they'd have time to build a case, find a strategy, turn awareness into protection. Or maybe Rehia had been right from the start. Maybe the warning had come too late, and all that remained was witnessing, remembering, honoring what had existed before the machines erased it. Marcus kept writing until dawn, fighting exhaustion, fueled by the weight of the promise he'd made to the sleeping figure in the next room. Together we stop this. The words felt both like hope and a eulogy. They set out at first light, Marcus and Sarah laden with backpacks full of equipment, Rehia moving ahead with the steady, ground-eating lope of someone who knew the terrain intimately. The creature's injury was still visible in its gait, a favoring of the right leg, a slight hitch in the stride, but it moved with remarkable efficiency through dense forest that would have challenged experienced hikers. The morning was cold, frost glittering on undergrowth, their breath misted in shafts of early sunlight breaking through the canopy. Marcus carried the satellite phone, 2 cameras, medical supplies and camping gear. Sarah had the laptops, portable DNA sequencer, and documentation equipment. They were prepared for a 3-day expedition if necessary, though Rehia had indicated through gestures that the destination was closer, maybe 6 to 8 hours of hard hiking. Rehia led them away from established trails, following paths that were barely visible, game trails, ridgelines, routes that favored cover and avoided open spaces. The creature moved with habitual caution, stopping frequently to scan the terrain, listening to the forest sounds. Marcus realized this was learned behavior. Generations of avoiding human contact had turned stealth into instinct. By mid-morning, they'd climbed into true wilderness. The forest here was old-growth temperate rainforest, massive Sitka spruce and western hemlock draped in moss, the canopy so dense that the understory existed in permanent twilight. Nurselog's decades dead hosted new growth, the cycle of decay and renewal visible in every direction. Rehia stopped at a stream to drink and rest. Its leg was bothering it. Marcus could see the creature massaging the injured area. He approached slowly, medical kit in hand, and gestured to examine the wound. Rehia nodded and sat on a fallen log, while Marcus unwrapped the bandage. The laceration was healing well, no signs of infection. But the surrounding tissue was inflamed, stressed by the hiking. Marcus applied fresh antibiotic ointment and rewrapped the leg with elastic compression bandage to provide support. Rahia watched the process with clear interest, occasionally making small vocalizations that might have been questions or comments. "Can you tell us more about your people?" Sarah asked, settling nearby with her laptop to take notes. "How long have you lived here?" Rahia considered, then began drawing in the soft earth beside the stream. It drew a series of circles, many circles, spiraling outward. It pointed to the innermost circle, made the sign for elder, then pointed to the outermost. The gesture suggested deep time, many generations. Sarah counted the circles. 30? More? She looked at Marcus. If each circle represents a generation, say 20 years, that's 600 years minimum, maybe much more. They've been here since before European contact, since before this was Washington, when this was just forest. Rahia nodded, then added more details. It drew a coastline, placed figures along it, then showed movement inland. Migration or retreat. It made the human sign, the sweeping motion, and then showed the figures moving up into mountains away from the coast. They were displaced, Marcus said, maybe by early settlers, maybe by indigenous tribes. They moved into more remote territory to avoid contact. Rahia confirmed this with emphatic nodding. It drew more. Figures watching from tree lines as humans built structures, figures moving at night, figures teaching young ones the signs for danger, the techniques of hiding. A culture built around invisibility. The implications were staggering. This people had survived contact with multiple waves of human expansion, indigenous populations, European colonization, modern development, by becoming ghosts, by perfecting the art of not being seen. And now the last refuge was about to be carved into board feet and wood chips. They resumed hiking, climbing higher. The terrain grew steeper, more challenging. Marcus's legs burned with the effort, his breathing labored in the thinning air. Sarah fared better, her conditioning from years of fieldwork evident. But Rahia moved as if the elevation was nothing, occasionally looking back to make sure they were keeping up. By early afternoon, they reached a ridgeline that offered a view back down the mountain. Marcus could see the logging clear-cuts in the distance, brown scars against the green forest. Even from miles away, the destruction was visible. Thousands of acres transformed into waste. Rahia stood at the ridge looking out, and Marcus saw its shoulders sag. The creature made the grief gesture, hands covering face, then slowly drawn down. When it turned back to them, there were no tears. Perhaps it lacked the lacrimal response, but the expression of sorrow was unmistakable. It pointed to the clear-cuts, then made a new sign. Both hands held together, then sharply broken apart. Already broken, already lost. "Parts of their range," Sarah whispered. "Already gone." Rahia nodded. It drew in the air, a large circle, then shading in portions. Marcus understood. The core territory remained, but the periphery had been eaten away piece by piece over years. Each logging season took more. Each development project carved away another slice. The people had adapted by contracting inward, compressing into a smaller area, but there was a limit to how much compression was possible. And the next logging expansion would breach that limit. They descended from the ridge into a steep valley. The forest here was untouched, primeval. Trees that had been growing since before the American Revolution towered overhead. The silence was profound, broken only by wind in the high branches and the occasional bird call. Rahia's demeanor changed. It moved more cautiously now, stopping frequently to vocalize. Low, resonant sounds that carried through the forest. Calls, Marcus realized, announcing their presence, seeking permission to approach. After the third call, there was an answer. Another voice, deeper and more resonant than Rahia's, calling from somewhere ahead. The sound raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms. It was language, not words he could understand, but modulated, intentional communication. Rahia gestured for them to stay close and continued forward. They rounded a massive boulder formation and emerged into a hidden meadow, perhaps 200 feet across. And there, at the far edge, near a rock face with a dark cave opening, were the people. Marcus stopped breathing. There were 7 visible, with movement suggesting more in the shadows. All sizes, tall adults like Rahaya, smaller juveniles, one individual that appeared elderly, its hair more silver than brown. They stood in a loose group watching the newcomers with wary interest. Rahaya called out again, a complex vocalization, then made sweeping gestures toward Marcus and Sarah. The explanation, Marcus guessed. These are the ones I told you about, the ones who helped, who want to help. The largest of the group, the one with the deepest voice, stepped forward. It was massive, easily 8.5 feet tall, shoulders that seemed too broad for human proportions. It studied Marcus and Sarah with intense amber eyes, then made a series of gestures too rapid for Marcus to follow. Rahia responded with its own gestures, the exchange clearly communicative. An argument, a discussion. Finally, Rahia made the greeting gesture, palm to forehead extended outward, and looked at Marcus expectantly. Marcus stepped forward slowly, heart hammering. He repeated the greeting, trying to get the motion exactly right. Then he made the signs Rahia had taught him. I come in peace. I want to help. I want to learn. The large individual watched closely. Then, slowly, it returned the greeting. Its voice rumbled out a vocalization that might have been a name. It pointed to itself, repeated the sound. Sarah pulled out her camera, moving carefully. May I document? She asked softly. Photographs, video. Rahia made a questioning gesture to the large individual. The leader, Marcus was certain now. The elder. After a moment's consideration, it nodded once. Sarah began photographing, her movements slow and non-threatening. Marcus pulled out his own camera and started a video recording. The people in the meadow watched with obvious curiosity. The juveniles whispered among themselves, actual whispering, soft sounds that carried social content. Over the next hour, Rahia facilitated introductions. Each individual came forward in turn, offered a name, vocalizations Marcus couldn't hope to reproduce, and exchanged the greeting gesture. Marcus counted 9 adults, 4 juveniles, and 3 infants being carried, 16 individuals visible. Where were the rest of the 40 Rahia had indicated? As if reading his thought, Rahia made gestures toward the cave and the surrounding forest. Others hunting, others gathering, others watching. Of course, not the entire population would gather in one place, especially with unknown visitors present. Security, caution, survival instinct. The elder, Marcus began thinking of it as elder for simplicity, gestured toward the cave entrance. An invitation. Rahia nodded to Marcus and Sarah, encouraging them to follow. The cave interior was extraordinary. The main chamber was large, perhaps 50 feet across, with natural light filtering in through cracks in the rock above. But it had been modified, subtly but definitely. The floor had been leveled with carefully placed stones. Fire pits were arranged in a circle, blackened from use but currently cold. Along the walls, sleeping areas had been created using moss and plant materials, separated into obvious family groupings. And on the walls themselves, art. Marcus approached slowly, barely believing what he was seeing. The artwork was both primitive and sophisticated, figures rendered in ochre and charcoal depicting hunts, gatherings, interactions. But more than that, symbols, repeated patterns that suggested meaning. Language, mathematical concepts, cultural markers. This is incredible, Sarah breathed. She was photographing everything, documenting each panel. This is representational art, abstract symbolism, spatial organization. This is material culture. This is civilization. Elder came to stand beside Marcus. It pointed to one particular section of wall art, a large panel showing many figures gathered around a central symbol. The symbol was abstract. Concentric circles with lines radiating outward. Elder tapped the symbol, then made a gesture that incorporated multiple signs, sacred, important together, memory. A cultural touchstone, Marcus said, something that defines group identity. Elder nodded. It made a new gesture, pointing to the artwork, then to the individuals in the cave, then to itself. Finally, it placed both hands over its heart. The meaning was clear. This is who we are. This is what we are. Xia led them deeper into the cave. A side chamber had been set up as what Marcus could only describe as a workshop. Stone tools arranged carefully, plant materials sorted by type, what looked like medicinal preparations in crude containers. Technology, not advanced by human industrial standards, but thoughtful, intentional, refined through generations of accumulated knowledge. Sarah was taking notes rapidly. Tool use, resource management, specialized knowledge. Marcus, this is a fully functional society. They have division of labor, skill specialization, intergenerational knowledge transfer. Another chamber revealed something even more profound. Marked stones arranged in patterns. Rahia gestured to these, made signs indicating remember elder, gone. Grave markers. This chamber was a cemetery. Each stone represented a lost member of the community. Marcus counted 18 stones. 18 lives lived and mourned. Elder joined them in the chamber. It stood before the stones for a long moment, then made the grief gesture. When it turned back to Marcus, its expression was open, vulnerable. It pointed to the stones, then to the meadow outside, then made the family sign, followed by the spreading fingers that meant people. Finally, it made a gesture that needed no translation. It drew a line in the air, pointed to one side, the past, then the other, the future, and made a cutting motion between them. Line broken. Continuity threatened. Population bottleneck, Sarah said quietly. They know. They understand they're at the edge of viability. Elder nodded, understanding her tone even if not the specific words. It led them back to the main chamber, where more individuals had gathered. The hunting and gathering parties had returned. Marcus counted again, 23 now visible. Perhaps the full 40 were dispersed across multiple sites for safety. The elder called the group to attention with a deep vocalization. What followed was clearly some form of counsel or discussion. Elders spoke in their language, modulated sounds, gestures, body language, all combining to convey complex ideas. Rahia responded, gesturing toward Marcus and Sarah, using signs they'd learned. Other individuals joined in, the exchange becoming animated. Marcus watched, wishing desperately that he could understand. But the emotional content was clear enough. There was disagreement. Some individuals made aggressive gestures, the danger sign, combined with the human sign. They were afraid, distrustful. Some argued for caution, but Ruhia persisted. It pointed to its bandaged leg, then to Marcus. It made signs, help, heal, care. It drew in the air again, showing the logging encroachment, then pointed to Marcus and made the sign for stop. The argument, they helped me. They want to stop the destruction. Give them a chance. Finally, Elder raised both hands, calling for silence. The gesture carried authority. Elder looked at Marcus for a long time, those amber eyes searching, weighing. Then it made a decision. It gestured to Rahia, who came to Marcus and Sarah. Rahia made a series of signs. Elder wants to show you. Important. Sacred. Must understand. Elder led them out of the cave and around the rock face to a sheltered overhang. There, protected from weather, was a panel of rock art unlike the others. It was more elaborate, spanning 20 feet of stone surface. And it told a story. The leftmost section showed many figures, hundreds, rendered as a dense cluster, the people in their prime. The middle section showed change, the human sign appearing, growing larger, multiplying. The figures of Rahia's people grew fewer, more scattered. The rightmost section showed recent times, just a few figures compressed into a small space, with human symbols surrounding them on all sides. And at the very end, a final image, the concentric circle symbol, the cultural touchstone, drawn one last time. Below it, empty space, blank stone. The message was devastating in its clarity. This is our history, our decline, our ending. Elder placed one hand on the empty space. Its shoulders shook, not with tears, but with the physical manifestation of grief. When it turned back to Marcus, its face held a terrible dignity. It made a new gesture, one Marcus hadn't seen before, both hands extended, palms up, as if offering something. Then it pointed to Marcus and Sarah, to the cameras they carried, to the documentation they'd been gathering. Finally, it touched the artwork, then its own chest, and made the gesture again. Offering. They want us to remember. Sarah's voice broke. They know we can't stop this. They know it's too late. They're giving us their story, asking us to carry it forward when they're gone. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. No, we can still. There has to be a way. But even as he spoke, a sound cut through the valley, distant but unmistakable, the growl of heavy machinery. Engines, many engines, everyone froze. The people in the meadow looked toward the sound, bodies tensing. Rhea made the danger sign urgently. Elder's expression shifted from grief to alarm. Marcus pulled out his satellite phone with shaking hands, checking the date. His stomach dropped. They moved up the schedule. The logging. They were supposed to start next Monday, but they started early, Sarah finished. They're already here. The sound grew louder, chainsaws now, adding their shriek to the engine rumble, and something else. Dogs barking, many dogs. Tracking dogs, Marcus said. They must have found our trail, or Rahia's. They're following us. The people began moving immediately, no panic but clear urgency. Parents gathered children. Adults collected tools, supplies. They'd done this before, Marcus realized. They'd practiced retreat. Elder gave rapid instructions, individuals dispersing in different directions. A tactical evacuation, divide to reduce risk, scatter to avoid capture. Rahia came to Marcus and Sarah. It made urgent signs. You go back, lead them away, give us time. Come with us, Marcus pleaded. We'll take you somewhere safe. We'll find sanctuary. Rahia shook its head firmly. It pointed to the people, then to itself. My place is with my family, my people. Then it made the gesture Elder had used, offering. It pressed something into Marcus's hand, a stone, carefully carved with symbols, the cultural touchstone, the identity marker. No, I can't. This is yours. But Rahia closed Marcus's fingers around the stone. It made the signs, remember, tell, witness. Sarah was crying openly now. We failed you. We were too late. Rahia reached out and touched her face gently, wiping away tears with a calloused thumb. It made a new sign, one Marcus understood instinctively, even though they hadn't learned it. Index finger pointed to its own eyes, then turned to point at Marcus and Sarah. I see you. You see me. We saw each other. The acknowledgement, the witness, the knowing. The machinery sounds were closer now, maybe a mile away. The dog's barking was excited, tracking scent. Elder appeared beside them. It took Marcus's other hand, pressed it to its chest so he could feel the heartbeat beneath thick hair and muscle. Then it pointed to Marcus's chest. You carry this. You carry us. I promise, Marcus whispered. I promise I'll tell them. I'll make them understand what was lost. Elder nodded once, then turned and moved with surprising speed toward the tree line. Within seconds, it had vanished into the forest. The others were already gone, dispersed like smoke. Only Rahia remained. It stood for one more moment, looking at Marcus and Sarah. Then it made the greeting gesture one final time, palm to forehead, extended outward, and added the offering gesture. Go in peace. Carry our memory. It turned and limped rapidly toward the cave entrance. Marcus watched it disappear into darkness, joining whatever family members had gone that direction. The meadow was empty now, showing no signs that 30 individuals had been there moments before. The people had become ghosts again. We have to go, Sarah said, tugging his arm. Marcus, if they catch us here with all this documentation... He nodded numbly. They began moving back the way they'd come, half running, using the GPS to navigate. The stone artifact felt heavy in his pocket, a burden and a blessing. Behind them, the sounds of destruction grew louder, chainsaws biting into ancient wood, trees crashing, machinery grinding forward, eating the forest. They made it back to the research station by nightfall, exhausted and shattered. Marcus immediately began uploading all their documentation to secure servers, multiple backups. Sarah started writing a comprehensive report, trying to capture everything they'd witnessed. The satellite phone rang at 11 p.m. Officer Brandt. "Dr. Whitley, I need to know where you've been. There are reports of a large unknown animal in the forest. Logging crews have suspended operations in Section 18 due to safety concerns. Do you know anything about this?" Marcus closed his eyes. "No. I've been in the field conducting research, but I'll return to the area tomorrow and investigate." He hung up and looked at Sarah. "What do? We have everything documented. We have proof. We could go public. And what happens then?" Sarah asked quietly. "Media circus, scientific expeditions, tracking teams. They'll find Rahia's people within a week. They'll be captured, studied, placed in facilities. Is that protection, or is that destruction with a different name?" Marcus had no answer. He thought of Elder's gesture, the offering, the choice to be remembered rather than exposed, the dignity of choosing invisibility over becoming spectacles. "They asked us to witness," he said finally, "to remember, to tell their story. But maybe not yet. Maybe not until they're gone," Sarah finished. "Until the last one is gone, and we're the only ones who can speak for what existed." The weight of it was crushing. They had documented a people, a culture, a lineage that stretched back hundreds of thousands of years, and they would hold that secret, protecting it, honoring the trust placed in them, even if it meant watching, helpless, as the last refuge was destroyed. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the overlook, looking down at what had been the valley. Section 18 was now a moonscape of stumps and mud. Sections 17, 19, and 20 were in various stages of harvest. The forest was gone. The meadow was gone. The cave, if it still existed, was buried under tons of displaced soil. He'd return monthly, hoping for a sign, a glimpse of reddish-brown fur, a sighting, a trace. Nothing. The logging crews had reported strange occurrences during the operation, missing equipment, sounds in the night, shadows that seemed too large and too quick. But nothing conclusive, nothing anyone would believe. Sarah had gotten a job at a university in Oregon. They talked weekly, always circling around the same questions. Should they publish? Should they reveal what they knew? Could it make a difference? The answer was always the same. Not yet. Honor the trust. Protect the secret. Wait. Marcus pulled out the carved stone. He carried it everywhere now. The symbols were worn smooth from constant handling. He ran his thumb over the concentric circles, the radiating lines, the identity of a people who had chosen dignity over display. "I remember," he said to the empty air. "I saw you. You were real. You existed. And what happened here, what we did to you, I'll make sure it's not forgotten." A raven called from a dead snag, the sound harsh in the devastated landscape. Marcus watched it fly off toward the remaining tree line, toward higher ground where perhaps, impossibly, hopefully, some small remnant might have found refuge. He didn't believe it. The population was too small, the pressure too great. They were gone, or they would be soon. 40 individuals scattering into an ever-shrinking wilderness, genetic diversity too low to sustain another generation. The warning had come too late. The machines had been too many. The world had been too greedy. But for one moment, in a meadow that no longer existed, in a cave that was now rubble, humans and another people had seen each other, had recognized each other, had tried to help each other, and that, Marcus thought, would have to be enough. He placed the stone back in his pocket and turned away from the overlook, carrying the memory forward into a world that would never know what it had lost. The last witness. The final keeper of a secret that would die with him or be revealed when time and distance made it safe, whichever came first. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think about what we lose when forests fall and voices are silenced, then its purpose is fulfilled. Subscribe to our channel for more speculative fiction that asks hard questions about science, ethics, and survival. What would you do if you met someone the world doesn't believe exists? Let us know in the comments. And remember, sometimes the most important stories are the ones we almost missed.